Okay, and here we are today. Welcome, Robert. Today we're here with Robert Lipsyte. He was an award-winning sports writer for the New York Times and an Emmy-winning host on the nightly public affairs show, The 11th Hour. He is the author of 12 acclaimed novels for young adults and the recipient of the Margaret A. Edwards Award, honoring his lifetime contribution in the genre. He lives in Manhattan and on Shelter Island, New York, with his wife, Lois, and your dog, Milo. Is that correct?
Unfortunately, Milo died, but he's been replaced by Apollo, a standard poodle, who is very happy today because standard poodles won Best in Show at the Westminster Show at Madison Square Garden.
Awesome. I'm sorry to hear about Milo. We just lost two of our dogs about a month ago, a week apart from each other.
Oh, man, that's hard.
It's hard, yeah, definitely. But we have a puppy, so we're moving on.
Yeah. I don't understand why sometimes the loss of a dog seems more poignant than the loss of a human being.
A lot of thoughts go into your head. You spend a lot of time with your dog. They probably know more than maybe other people know about you. It's definitely hard. But you've written a lot of books, a lot of great books. The one I've been interested in is Heroes of Baseball. Basically because you kind of point out a lot of faults with athletes and baseball players in this book. They're just human beings like everybody else. But I thought it'd be great to talk about, and we can get into it, the Astros scandal. In regards to some of the issues that have been in the past with baseball, such as Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa with steroids, Pete Rose gambling.
Ryan, I'm a little underwhelmed by the Astros situation. And you know what really snapped it for me was when Trump started pimping Pete Rose to get into the Hall of Fame. And I was thinking, man, here's this lawless president now bringing this kind of lawlessness to the one place where we thought, incorrectly, of course, the one place where we thought there was a kind of sanctity and purity. Okay, the Astros. Now, you're too young to remember, but because you're obviously a historian, is that in 1951, the shot heard round the world when Bobby Thompson got the Giants into the World Series. There was somebody in the scoreboard with binoculars stealing signs. Now, I think maybe in 1951, binoculars were the equivalent of today's technology. Maybe that's too far of a stretch. But I think that the real rap on the Astros seems to have been not so much the sign stealing, which you're allowed to do, of course, if you're a runner on second base and you're watching, but because of the elaborate, technology, the video, the audio, the bells and whistles. But isn't that really a kind of extension of what's been going on? I mean, Ty Cobb, bad guy. Stole signs. Everybody stole signs. Was it because it was so elaborate? Was it because in this desperate time we live in, we have to keep this sense of baseball as pure? I mean, I don't really kind of get it. And as you brought up so very well in your intro, baseball has really a history of cheating. Steroids, of course. I don't even believe we're out of the steroid age at the moment.
I agree with you.
I think that the doctors are so much smarter than they were, 20 years ago. And usually the users are ahead of the enforcers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the question. I mean, what do you think? Do you think sports should reflect the lives we live, or that they should be a never land?
No, I don't think it should be a lawless organization. I do remember growing up as a little boy, knowing that it's the job to find out what the signs are, find out what the base coach's signs are. You want to know when that person's stealing. I vividly remember somebody teaching us to watch the catcher's muscles in his forearms to see which ones quiver when they put down certain signals. I mean, I remember that. But then when I talk to even my son now, my son.
This is when you were a kid?
When I was a kid, yeah.
Well, this is already very sophisticated. And a coach, an adult coach told you this?
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow.
But when I talk to my son now, who's 24 and just finished playing college baseball, about the Astros, and he thinks it's the worst thing that could happen. I don't know. I don't know where does it end. I mean, it's obviously a given. You're trying to get an upper hand and an advantage in any sport,
right?
Whatever it would be, football, when they would use the grip on their hands to catch the football better, or steroids, or
surgery.
Yes.
Where does performance enhancement begin and end?
Right.
That's a hard question.
And you brought up a great point. I was going to bring that up in my question. Is now it opened up the re-entry for Pete Rose, a push to get back into the Hall of Fame, or back into baseball in general. Where does it end? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that.
One of the rationales for bringing him back was that he only bet on his own team, which may or may not be true. I don't believe that. But even if he only bet on his own team, anytime he bet on his own team, he knew something.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
and he can definitely sway the outcome of a game.
Yeah. Right. So I mean, at the same week that the president is going to make sure that his pal Roger Stone, doesn't go to the big house forever, he's going to reach out to Pete Rose. Somehow I feel uncomfortable, weighing, Pete Rose on one hand and Roger Stone, that horrible SEAL team member, Eddie Gallagher, who killed people for sport in Afghanistan. Now, I love Pete Rose. Let me just say it out there. I covered him. He was a really nice guy. And he was a good guy. I mean, now some other reporters felt that he was doing this for show. But I remember on more than one occasion, particularly when we were in Cincinnati, but also when he was traveling Philadelphia, he would go out of his way to be nice to some high school kid who was reporting for his local paper. He was this kid, somehow gets through PR down to the dugout before a game. Oh, Mr. Rose, could I ask you? Well, of course. And he would give the kid 10, 15 minutes and talk to them. I thought it was wonderful. I mean, certainly because I come out of a time where I remember Mickey Mantle spitting at kids who asked for
wow.
Oh, yeah, he was terrible. And an awful lot of ball players that we were conditioned to adore who were really scummy guys. But Pete was nice. Pete answered questions. And of course, this is self-serving, but Pete was nice to the media as well. He was also a hell of a ball player. What a great ball player he was. So I was really sorry that, the anvil fell on his head. But he brought it on himself. He himself had some dark corners. We knew, but in those days we never reported, we knew that there in the stands, and he was a married man, in the stands there was a pretty young woman wearing a diamond ankle bracelet that said, "To my rookie of the year." This is Pete. Okay, so we can appreciate Charlie Hustle, but we don't have to put him in the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Well, I'm a Mets fan. I've always been a Mets fan. So in my mind, I always remember Pete Rose. They threw the ball over to first base and he slammed it into the turf. I don't know, that always irritated me, but he wasn't on my team.
Right.
I do think gambling, again, you said before, where does it start and stop? Where do you allow this or don't allow that? Somebody has to make
Yeah.
that fine line. I guess that's the commissioner. But again, with all the penalties that the commissioner laid out, are they right? Are they wrong? I don't know. They seem to stop at the front office with the Astros and didn't bring it down to the players at this point. Maybe they still will.
Well, people are calling for every player on those teams to be banned. Wow. And also the games to be stripped, the trophies. I don't know. That's a little harsh, maybe. But do you think that, you know, I really would have to believe that stealing signs was that awful. They didn't fix games. I mean, I think the Black Sox scandal of 1919 is kind of the, I hate to say gold standard, but, that's kind of the bar. Fixing the World Series, well, you're out of here. Of course, the reason that they were called the Black Sox was because their owner was so cheap, he did not launder their uniforms often enough on the road. So they were often wearing dirty black uniforms. And apparently it was a very unpleasant situation for the ball players. But that's of no account. But I mean, we've seen worse before. And I just can't get too excited about the Astros.
Mm-hmm.
As a Mets fan, we're angry. We don't like the Astros, but what are you going to do?
How did you get involved in writing? Like when you were young? When did you know that?
Well, I knew from the third grade that the only thing I wanted to do was write.
Wow.
I mean, I was lucky that way. There was, nothing else kind of diverted me. I was briefly a pre-med in college because, I'm Jewish, and Jewish boys of that time all had to be doctors or lawyers. But I got out of that soon enough, and right after college graduation, I answered an ad in the New York Times for what turned out to be copy boy in the sports department of the New York Times.
Wow.
And things went on from there. And it was really a good time to do that because they were less interested in people who really knew their X's and O's, like you, and then people who were feature writers, which I basically was. And it was not something, it was just going to be a summer job for me before I went to California and became a screenwriter. But I loved it. I loved the Times, and I came to love sports, and I stayed.
So growing up, you did not love sports? Did it kind of just?
No, I mean, I was not as serious. I was a fat kid, so I didn't play ball till late. I was not a serious fan. But my dad was a high school English teacher, and he was more interested in my reading. So it was serendipitous, and then of course I got two lucky assignments early on. When I was 24, the Mets, the first spring training of the New York Mets, they sent me because they wanted a feature writer. They knew that it was going to be a lousy team, so why waste the time of a real baseball writer? So I went down and basically wrote, and it was a different time. I mean, 1962 with the Mets, it was heaven. I mean, I shagged balls in the outfield. I batted in batting practice, which was a real eye opener. So the batting practice pitcher is a coach, not even a pitcher, Cookie Lavagetto.
Ah.
And his little soft, down the middle, they were in the catcher's glove before I, could move the bat. And in the outfield, what has always been called a soft fly ball. Well, a soft fly ball from the bat of a major leaguer, feels feels like a shot put going through your hand. And I guess my hand still hurts remembering that from how many years ago. And so I really became to understand the difference between me and them. You know, that the Major League Baseball player is another species of human being. So that was a great eye opener. And then, of course, my big break was in 1964 when Cassius Clay challenged Sonny Liston for the heavyweight championship. And the Times real boxing writer didn't want to be bothered. You know, well, Cassius Clay was going to be knocked out in the first round. Why go all the way down to Miami? And he said the magic words to the sports editor, which were, send the kid. He's not doing anything. So I was a kid. And I went down, and of course, it made my career.
And then that's when you started writing books at that time? Or were you still...
I didn't start writing books until, a couple of years later, yeah. I mean, I started writing books. The first really book that sent kids to college was a novel called The Contender about a black kid boxer. And that really came about the night before an Ali fight. I'm in Las Vegas. It was Ali, Floyd Patterson. I take an old boxing manager out to dinner. He's kind of shuffling around, you know. He gets walking around money to be on the scene, I guess, to look for sympathetic sports writers who would take him to dinner. And he told me this wonderful story about owning a gym which had 3 flights of dark stairs. And he would, at night, he slept with a gun and a German Shepherd in the gym. And at night, he would be waiting for the footsteps of a kid who would come up alone at night and obviously scared, but, using his fear to fuel his determination to get up those stairs and learn how to box. And this kid, said the old boxing manager, would become a contender. Not necessarily a champion, which is luck, but a contender, coming out of your own heart and soul, doing the best that you can. So I was aflame. And what kind of kid? What would happen? Who would be waiting for him at the time? And so I wrote this novel called The Contender. The old boxing manager, who, as I realize now, was much younger than I am right now, but seems so old to me when I was 26, was named Cus D'Amato. And after that night in Vegas, he went to a friend's house in upstate New York and just rocked on the porch, waiting to die. His life was over. He had managed Floyd Patterson and Jose Torres, but, he was persona non grata in boxing now. Nobody would touch him. And he was rocking on the porch one day. Car pulls up. A former boxer of his comes out, who is now a counselor at a juvenile facility, a reform school. He says, Cus, I wonder if you could help me out. We've got this 13-year-old kid at the facility, weighs 200 pounds. None of it is fat. He's knocked out every kid in the facility, and he's starting to work on the guards. You could come over and kind of channel some of that anger and energy into the discipline of boxing. And Cus said, no. But finally he was persuaded. And of course, the kid was Mike Tyson. And Cus's life began all over again. And he made Mike Tyson read my book, The Contender.
It's amazing. Well, so now when you were just starting out, you were with the 1962 Mets, so you're with Casey Stengel,
Yes.
many other players I can probably name. and then you're at a Cassius Clay fight. Did you appreciate
No,
what you were around?
that's a really smart question, and the answer is no. I was not sophisticated enough to realize where I was and what was happening. I knew these were great stories, and I knew that I was privileged, to be in this place and to be working for the New York Times. But did I have any sense of the history? No. There were older reporters there who I'm sure did, but I didn't really understand. For example, with the Mets, it was a great assignment, but I didn't really have the sophisticated background of the other New York Times baseball writers who had covered the Giants and the Dodgers before they were ripped away to the West Coast. And I mean, those guys, saw this as, a kind of manna from heaven, that there was a new team in town. I didn't quite have that. And when I was covering Cassius Clay, as he was then called in the very beginning, some of the older reporters would say, "Why are you wasting your time with this kid? You should be on, the northern part of, Miami Beach, where Sonny Liston is training with Joe Louis." And, I read history. I know who Joe Louis was, but he didn't have that kind of sentimental resonance for me that he had for these old boxing reporters. So I didn't really see, the history of it until later, which I kind of appreciated. And I think I appreciated most when Tyson started taking people apart, including Holmes, a lovely man, lovely boxer, who had taken Ali apart.
And I'm from Easton, so Larry Holmes lives right where we are.
Yeah, he seems like a really nice guy, or he was, at that time. And I remember, the pain of Ali, at the very end, with Larry Holmes, who also seemed to have some sort of sentimental pain of beating him so badly. But then, the cycle comes around and Tyson beats Larry Holmes.
Mm.
It was then, watching Tyson beat Larry Holmes, that I began to more fully understand, the kind of this historical cycle of sports.
Mm. Sports seem to present themselves very well for these great stories, books and movies.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other authors or directors or films that you really, for you just love?
Well, I mean, things like Bull Durham were just kind of wonderful. But I think the film that really turned me on, and I don't even think anybody thinks about it anymore, is a film called It Happens Every Spring. And it's a black and white film. Ray Milland was the star. And it was about a chemistry professor in a small college who's a big baseball fan. And while he's, teaching his chemistry labs, he's really on this little radio. He's listening to the St. Louis Cardinals. And a baseball comes crashing through his laboratory window and smashes the bottle of chemicals he had been working on for years, his big experiment. And when he lifts the ball out and puts it on the table, he notices that the ball moves away from anything made of wood. And slowly he comes to realize that whatever liquid is left in this bottle, is an anti-wood. It's a wood repellent. And he could become a pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals and strike everybody out because nobody, once he got a little of this substance on the ball, nobody could touch it with their bat. And it's a comedy, of course, and it's a wonderful movie as he wins. You know, this meek chemistry professor becomes a tough, baseball pitcher who wins the World Series. And somehow that really bit into the idea that we must all feel those moments before you fall asleep when you're winning the World Series or throwing the touchdown that wins the Super Bowl. That kind of the fantasies that we all live.
Being around all these great players as a writer, and you've seen behind the scenes, behind the stage curtain. Did it change your perception of them?
Well, not really. I mean, it was
our favorite players
and disadvantage that I had not been a really major fan. I mean, sports writers who had been really major fans growing up really had a body of knowledge and also a kind of emotional reservoir from which they plucked their feelings. I didn't really have that. And so I really kind of approached everything with the same way that I approached when I covered the cops. And I had other assignments besides sports, coming up. And it would have to be the individual that touched me, not anything that I had known about him. I mean, something like Mickey Mantle. I really had, other than knowing growing up that, he was a great player and, he had bad legs and he expected to die early from cancer like everybody else in his family. I didn't have really major understanding about who he was and what he was like. So that the first time that I ever met him, which was a kind of a charged situation, 1960, I'm 22, a fan had jumped out of the stands in Yankee Stadium, ran across center field, and punched Mickey in the face.
I punched Mickey Mantle in the mouth.
What?
Yeah, I punched him, and they took him to the hospital, and then they canceled the rest of the week.
You punched who in the mouth?
Mickey Mantle.
Whoa, in 1960, there was no recreational violence. This was pretty hot stuff. So the managing editor of the paper, not the sports editor, the managing editor of the paper said, send somebody up there to talk to Mickey Mantle about what happened last night. So they decided to send the most expendable person, which was, I was on night rewrite. They sent me up, and I got to Yankee Stadium. It was well before the game. Mickey and Yogi Berra are playing catch in front of the dugout. And I said to Mickey, excuse me, Mr. Mantle. I was wearing a suit and tie. Excuse me, Mr. Mantle, could I talk to you about what happened? And he just kind of casually looked over his shoulder, and he said something that I probably can't say on your podcast, but it was a very crude and impossible suggestion. Figure it out. And so I kind of thought, he wouldn't say that. This isn't Mickey Mantle. I must have heard wrong. So I rephrased the question, and he signaled Yogi, and I had a lot of more hair then, and they started throwing the ball. I mean, the control was amazing. She started throwing the ball through my hair. I realized the interview was over. and that was Mickey. And I remember feeling really bad because I felt that I was the only person in the world who had ever provoked Mickey into using bad language. Now, should I even be in this business? I mean, I really, I had some of the same feelings that women must have, when they've been assaulted or something, what did I do wrong? So it was really a very long time before I confided in an older reporter. I told him what happened. He said, oh, it's Mickey being Mickey. You should see him spit at kids who ask for autographs. He's got a terrible mouth on him. And then I was really angry, but I wasn't so much angry at Mickey as I was at bad reporting at sports writers. He never really told us who these guys really are, what they're really like. So there's a coda to this story. So now, 20 years later, something like that. Yeah, well, 25 years later. It's 25 years later. Mantle has been banned from baseball for a while for betting or something. I forget what it was. In any case, what he does for a living is joke-a-stroke golf. You know, you go to a country club and get paid a lot to just kind of walk around with, you know, big CEOs, and they slap each other on the butt and tell stories. So I'm doing a piece for Sunday Morning, CBS Sunday Morning. I'm working at the time. After his day of drinking very heavily and playing joke-a-stroke golf, you know, they set 2-camera shoot back in the country club in the deserted bar. And he's still drinking, and we have this, you know, conversation. And he's not interested, and he's bored, and he's, you know, monosyllabic answers. It's a terrible interview. So I figured, what the hell? So I said, Mickey, and the camera's rolling. I said, Mickey, let's stop here. This is not going anywhere. But before we end, let me tell you something. I've always thought you were a stone. You know, I figured out the next word. And he looked at me. So for the first time, he's interested. You know, now it's a little different now. It's a different interview. And I said, yeah. And I said, want to know why I felt that way and still feel that way? But why? So I told him the story that I just told you. And he looked at me and he said, really? He reached down, brought up his drink, took a long slug. And he said, Bob, I remember that really well. His eyes are dancing and he's smiling. I remember that really well. Oh boy, it really bothered me for years. And that's why I became a drunk. And at that moment, I got an insight into the real Mickey Mantle. No wonder his teammates loved him. No wonder people thought he was, country hilarious. It was kind of a wonderful moment. We both laughed. And then I said, could we start the interview again? And he said, yeah, let's do it. And then we had a wonderful interview in which he ended up telling me that he has these terrible dreams in which he's late for a game at Yankee Stadium, and he's trying to crawl under the fence to get into the ballpark, but he's stuck and he can't move. And on the PA system, they're now batting for New York, number 7, and he can't move, and it's terrible. It was kind of very revealing. It was a man with a lot of issues and problems. It was wonderful, and I had never, of course, as a reporter, gotten anywhere near that, until that day. And, I think it to me, I kind of understood how much we don't really understand the pain, the inner life, the insecurities of these guys who, in every way, are everyday people with one extraordinary skill, with something that we can't even imagine doing ourselves, although we fantasize about it. But in every other way, they're the same people that we are. They're not these, bold, aggressive, heroes that we like to think they are.
I would love to speak to a few of them, and I'd like to know nowadays with social media. People just write horrific things about sports personalities and actors and actresses and anybody, even me. How do they handle that? I don't guess that you would have gotten that now.
Well, and this is a perfect thing for you and your video cast, because retired athletes, most of whom nobody ever talks to anymore, unless it's Joe Namath or somebody who still evokes some excitement, really are wonderful repositories of stories and information. And by the time they're in their 40s and 50s, they're ready. They're finally ready to talk. They have nothing to lose. And it's really interesting how they have had to deal with celebrity and fame, how they've had to deal with people, misinterpreting them entirely. If they brush somebody off, nobody ever thinks that, they're in pain or their mind is really messed up, they've just lost or whatever. But I think, starting to talk to them would be kind of wonderful.
That's great. I have some really interest. Well, Art Shamsky, I'm going to talk to in a couple weeks from the Mets, and Ed Hearn from the 1986 Mets, who has an interesting story. So I love to hear about positive stories. That's what I'm about.
Yeah.
Looking back, is there anybody or a few people who you just think back to and smile, like, that you covered, who were like really nice people?
I mean, I spent a lot of time at ESPN, on those number one shows, and I always got laughed out of the room when I said I thought the greatest, sports figure of our times was Billie Jean King. Not Muhammad Ali, not, any quarterback you can think of, but, how she really empowered half the world, all women, and how, historically and socially important she was. I liked her enormously. She made me smile. The other one who's made me smile was a very obscure boxer, although he did win the middleweight and welterweight titles, Dick Tiger. And he was from Nigeria. He was from a part of Nigeria that became Biafra, that broke away from Nigeria and then entered a civil war in which Nigerians, bombed his hometown and killed a lot of relatives and all. And when he came back to America to fight and to get some money to send to his compatriots, he decided to write a letter to the Queen. Nigeria was in the Commonwealth, and he had read that John Lennon of the Beatles had returned his Order of the British Empire. And Dick Tiger, when he became champion, had gotten such a medal. And he wanted to write a letter to the Queen, and he wanted to send the medal back, as protest to the fact that the British were doing nothing to stop the Civil War, to help his people, the Biafrans. And I was a columnist at the Times then. I had covered boxing. He asked me to help him. So ethically, I'm not sure whether it was the right thing to do or not, but I was a columnist, not a reporter, so I thought I could do it. So we wrote a letter to the Queen, explaining why we were doing this, and then wrapped his medal. The two of us went to the post office and mailed this package to the Queen. And for me, that was a really kind of poignant moment. It is sad, but it certainly, gave me a smile. He died early. He died poor. He was a guard at the Metropolitan Museum.
Oh.
He was about 42 when he died. But, that's kind of a memory that is really stuck in my mind. And that and Billie Jean King are, I think, two of the most important athletes in my life.
Was there somebody looking back that really helped you or inspired you to do what you do?
As a writer?
As a writer.
Oh, yeah. I don't think, My first job at the Times was was copy boy. You know, really glamorous job. You sharpen pencils. You know, when these dyspeptic guys on the copy desk yelled, "Boy!" There were no girls at that time. "Boy!" You kind of ran over and snatched, some piece of paper and took it to another desk. One of the worst jobs was filling up big vats of paste, library paste, which were used in the way that in those days they mocked up, the pages for the newspaper. The only thing that kept me there was a 25-year-old reporter. I was 19, and he was 25, and he was what I would become, the night rewrite reporter. His name was Gay Talese, who became, in his own way, a very famous writer of our time. And among my jobs was going out and getting coffee for other people and cocoa for Gay Talese. But along with bringing him cocoa, would be these mini lectures on journalism, the encouragement, support, telling me to start writing feature stories. And so I think that trying to be like Gay and trying to follow in his footsteps was incredibly inspirational. And so one night, despite his inspiration, I decided to quit. I hated the job. I hated being a copy boy. I didn't like these old dyspeptic men, who were the copy editors. My hours were 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. That was the life.
Oh.
And so I decided to quit. But the first person I told was Gay. I said, I really appreciate everything you've done, but I've been doing it for about a year and a half. I can't do this anymore. I got to go out and get a real job and start writing. And he said, well, I think you're making a mistake. I think, you're talented. I think you're a nice, polite boy. I think you're just the kind of fellow that the New York Times is looking for these days. So I think you should stay. But if you don't stay, I'll make a deal with you. I'll give you $5,000. This is 1958.
Wow.
$5,000, more than a year's salary for me. And in return, I'll take 10% of everything you make as a freelance writer for the next 5 years. I have that much faith in you. And I just, whoa. And him saying that was all the encouragement I needed to stay. Because I heard him say that I had some worth and some value. So I stayed. And a couple of months later, I was promoted. And by 21, I was the youngest reporter on the paper. So now it's 50 years later. 50 years later. And I'm writing my memoir, An Accidental Sports Writer. And I interview some of the important people in my life, including Gay Talese. And we're sitting there and talking. And the last question I ask is, so Gay, let me ask you this. 50 years ago, you offered me this deal. And I explained it. I said, is there any possibility now that you could have been just kidding? And he said, oh yeah, probably. my whole career was built on a lie.
But it all worked out.
But it all worked out.
I have two last questions, and then I appreciate everything. What do you say now to kids? The playoff games ended, and World Series ended at 12:30, 1:30 in the morning. Tough for anybody. You see what just happened with the Astros. Whether it's right or wrong, kids are impressionable. there's soccer now, there's lacrosse, there's a lot of other things. There's video games and iPads and iPhones. And what do we say to kids as far as baseball? At some point, I would think that it would catch up to Major League Baseball, that they're not really promoting the sport in the right way for young kids.
Right, it catches up to every sport. I mean, what do you say to a kid who wants to play football and get his bell rung? I think that you have to, about baseball, play the game, appreciate the game. Hope that you have a coach as good as you had, who says, watch the twitching muscles in the forearm to see what the pitch is going to be. I think you have to look past it in the same way that, when you think of great ball players, if you want to make heroes out of them, make heroes out of them for how hard they worked, their dedication to their skill, the idea that, this is a craft that you could master as well. If it turns you on, if you like doing it. I think you have to, and you need adult help sometimes, you have to look past all this other stuff. You can't let it, you can't allow what's happening in America right now to turn you off democracy. I mean, do you want to say, because we have a lawless president at a desperate time, that, wow, democracy doesn't work. We'll go live in a cave or become, authoritarians. So you have to tell kids, follow the sport that you love and play it and try to get past all these other things which happen in every other aspect of American life.
Exactly. That's a great answer. Last question. What's the perfect day to you? Like now? Like, what is your perfect day? What do you do? You just wake up, and by the time you go to bed at night, you just think to yourself, that was the perfect day.
Well, I've had a good conversation with my wife. I've talked to my kids and grandkids. I've walked the dog at least once. And I've spent at least 5 or 6 hours writing anything. That's a perfect day. And then to really top it off, if we can go out to dinner at a friend's house. I live on an island off the coast of Long Island. It's called Shelter Island. And it's a very isolated place, particularly in the wintertime. So there's a lot of home and home. People make dinner for each other, and there's not a lot of, fancy going out. There's no fancy restaurants or pubs or places to go. So that's kind of a perfect day. Write, talk to my family, walk the dog, and then see friends at the end of the day.
Awesome.
With a wine.
Sounds good. Sounds perfect to me. Well, I appreciate it, Robert. I definitely do. It was nice. I could probably talk to you all afternoon.
It's fun talking to you, Ryan. We'll do it again sometime.
Absolutely. I'd love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.